Welcome, everybody. This is Brother Eric Nelson, and I want to thank you for joining us today. The following is a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King concerning the resurrection of Yahushua HaMashiach, the Lord Jesus Christ. The last doctrine in our discussion deals with the resurrection story. This doctrine, upon which the Easter faith rests, symbolizes the ultimate Christian conviction that Christ conquered death. From a literary, historical, and philosophical point of view, this doctrine raises many questions. In fact, the external evidence for the authenticity of this doctrine is found wanting. But here again, the external evidence is not the most important thing, for it fails to tell us precisely the thing we most want to know. What experiences of early Christians led to the foundation of the doctrine? And again, this comes from the King Institute, Stanford University, the Martin Luther King Papers.
Every January, the media go into a kind of almost spastic frenzy of adulation for the so-called Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. King has even had a national holiday declared in his honor, an honor accorded to no other American. Let's take a look at this modern-day plastic god. Born in 1929, King was the son of a black preacher known at the time only as Daddy King. Daddy King named his son Michael. In 1935, Daddy King had an inspiration to name himself after the Protestant reformer Martin Luther. He declared to his congregation that henceforth they were to refer to him as Martin Luther King, and to his son as Martin Luther King Jr. None of this name-changing was ever legalized in court. Daddy King's son's real name is to this day Michael King. The first public sermon that King ever gave in 1947 at the Ebenezer Baptist Church was plagiarized from a homily by Protestant clergyman Harry Emerson Fosdick entitled "Life is What You Make It," according to the testimony of King's best friend of that time, Reverend Larry H. Williams. The first book that King wrote, Stride Toward Freedom, was plagiarized from numerous sources, all unattributed, according to documentation recently assembled by sympathetic King scholars Keith D. Miller, Ira G. Zepp Jr., and David J. Garrow. And no less an authoritative source than the 4 senior editors of the Papers of Martin Luther King Jr., an official publication of the Martin Luther King Center for Nonviolent Social Change, Incorporated, whose staff included King's widow Coretta, stated of King's writings at both Boston University and Crozer Theological Seminary, quote, "Judged retroactively by the standards of academic scholarship, his writings are tragically flawed by numerous instances of plagiarism. Appropriated passages are particularly evident in his writings in his major field of graduate study, systematic theology," close quote. King's essay, The Place of Reason and Experience in Finding God, written at Crozer, pirated passages from the work of theologian Edgar S. Brightman, author of The Finding of God. Another of King's theses, Contemporary Continental Theology, written shortly after he entered Boston University, was largely stolen from a book by Walter Marshall Horton. King's doctoral dissertation, A Comparison of the Conceptions of God in the Thinking of Paul Tillich and Harry Nelson Wyman, for which he was awarded a Ph.D. in theology, contains more than 50 complete sentences plagiarized from the Ph.D. dissertation of Dr. Jack Boozer, The Place of Reason in Paul Tillich's Concept of God. According to the Martin Luther King Papers, in King's dissertation, quote, only 49% of sentences in the section on Tillich contain 5 or more words that were King's own. Close quote. In the Journal of American History, June 1991, page 87, David J. Garrow, a leftist academic who is sympathetic to King, says that King's wife, Coretta Scott King, who also served as his secretary, was an accomplice in his repeated cheating. Reading Garrow's article, one is led to the inescapable conclusion that King cheated because he had chosen for himself a political role in which a PhD would be useful, and lacking the intellectual ability to obtain the title fairly, went after it by any means necessary. Why then, one might ask, did the professors at Crozer Theological Seminary and Boston University grant him passing grades and a PhD? Garrow states on page 89, quote, King's academic compositions, especially at Boston University, were almost without exception little more than summary descriptions and comparisons of others' writings. Nonetheless, the papers almost always received desirable letter grades, strongly suggesting that King's professors did not expect more. Close quote. The editors of the Martin Luther King Jr. papers state that, quote, the failure of King's teachers to notice his pattern of textual appropriation is somewhat remarkable, close quote. But researcher Michael Hoffman tells us, quote, actually, the malfeasance of the professors is not at all remarkable. King was politically correct. He was black, and he had ambitions. The leftist professors were happy to award a doctorate to such a candidate, no matter how much fraud was involved. Nor is it any wonder that it has taken 40 years for the truth about King's record of nearly constant intellectual piracy to be made public. Close quote. Supposed scholars who in reality shared King's vision of a racially mixed and Marxist America purposely covered up his cheating for decades. The cover-up still continues. From the New York Times of October 11, 1991, page 15, we learn that on October 10th of that year, a committee of researchers at Boston University admitted that, quote, there is no question but that Dr. King plagiarized in the dissertation. However, despite its finding, the committee said that, quote, no thought should be given to the revocation of Dr. King's doctoral degree, an action the panel said would serve no purpose, close quote. No purpose indeed. Justice demands that in light of his willful fraud as a student, the titles Reverend and Doctor should be removed from King's name. Well, friends, he is not a legitimate reverend, he is not a bona fide PhD, and his name isn't really Martin Luther King Jr. What's left? Just a sexual degenerate, an America-hating communist, and a criminal betrayer of even the interests of his own people. On Labor Day 1957, a special meeting was attended by Martin Luther King and 4 others at a strange institution called the Highlander Folk School in Monteagle, Tennessee. The Highlander Folk School was a communist front, having been founded by Miles Horton, Communist Party organizer for Tennessee, and Don West, organizer for North Carolina. The leaders of this meeting with King were the aforementioned Horton and West, along with Abner Berry and James Dombrowski, all open and acknowledged members of the Communist Party USA. The agenda of the meeting was a plan to tour the southern states to initiate demonstrations and riots. From 1955 to 1960, Martin Luther King's associate, advisor, and personal secretary was one Bayard Rustin. In 1936, Rustin joined the Young Communist League at New York City College. Convicted of draft dodging, he went to prison for 2 years in 1944. On January 23, 1953, the Los Angeles Times reported his conviction and sentencing to jail for 60 days for lewd vagrancy and homosexual perversion. Rustin attended the 16th convention of the Communist Party USA in February 1957. 1 month later, he and King founded the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or SCLC for short. The president of the SCLC was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The vice president of the SCLC was the Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, who was also the president of an identified communist front known as the Southern Conference Educational Fund, an organization whose field director, a Mr. Carl Braden, was simultaneously a national sponsor of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, of which you may have heard. The program director of the SCLC was the Reverend Andrew Young, in more recent years, Jimmy Carter's ambassador to the UN and mayor of Atlanta. Young, by the way, was trained at the Highlander Folk School, previously mentioned. Soon after returning from a trip to Moscow in 1958, Rustin organized the first of King's famous marches on Washington. The official organ of the Communist Party, the Worker, openly declared the march to be a communist project. Although he left King's employ as secretary in 1961, Rustin was called upon by King to be second in command of the much larger March on Washington, which took place on August 28, 1964. Bayard Rustin's replacement in 1961 as secretary and advisor to King was Jack Odell, also known as Hunter Pitts Odell. According to official records, in 1962, Jack Odell was a member of the National Committee of the Communist Party USA. He had been listed as a Communist Party member as early as 1956. Odell was also given the job of acting executive director for SCLC activities for the entire Southeast, according to the St. Louis Globe-Democrat of October 26, 1962. At that time, there were still some patriots in the press corps, and word of Odell's party membership became known. What did King do? Shortly after the negative news reports, King fired Odell with much fanfare. And he then, without the fanfare, immediately hired him again as director of the New York office of the SCLC, as confirmed by the Richmond News Leader of September 27, 1963. Also in 1963, a black man from Monroe, North Carolina, named Robert Williams, made a trip to Beijing, China. Exactly 20 days before King's 1964 March on Washington, Williams successfully urged Mao Zedong to speak out on behalf of King's movement. Mr. Williams was also around this time maintaining his primary residence in Cuba, from which he made regular broadcasts to the southern United States 3 times a week from high-power AM transmitters in Havana under the title Radio Free Dixie. In these broadcasts, he urged violent attacks by blacks against white Americans. During this period, Williams wrote a book entitled Negroes with Guns. The writer of the foreword for this book? None other than Martin Luther King Jr. It is also interesting to note that the editors and publishers of this book were, to a man, all supporters of the infamous Fair Play for Cuba Committee. According to King's biographer and sympathizer, David J. Garrow, quote, King privately described himself as a Marxist, close quote. In his 1981 book, The FBI and Martin Luther King Jr., Garrow quotes King as saying in SCLC staff meetings, quote, "We have moved into a new era, which must be an era of revolution. The whole structure of American life must be changed. We are engaged in the class struggle." Close quote. Jewish communist Stanley Levison can best be described as King's behind-the-scenes handler. Levison, who had for years been in charge of the secret funneling of Soviet funds to the Communist Party USA, was King's mentor and was actually the brains behind many of King's more successful ploys. It was Levison who edited King's book, Stride Toward Freedom. It was Levison who arranged for a publisher. Levison even prepared King's income tax returns. It was Leveson who really controlled the fundraising and agitation activities of the SCLC. Leveson wrote many of King's speeches. King described Leveson as one of his, quote, closest friends. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had for many years been aware of Stanley Leveson's communist activities. It was Leveson's close association with King that brought about the initial FBI interest in King. Lest you be tempted to believe the controlled media's lie about racists in the FBI being out to get King, you should be aware that the man most responsible for the FBI's probe of King was Assistant Director William C. Sullivan. Sullivan describes himself as a liberal and says that initially, quote, I was 100% for King because I saw him as an effective and badly needed leader for black people in their desire for civil rights, close quote. The probe of King not only confirmed their suspicions about King's communist beliefs and associations, but it also revealed King to be a despicable hypocrite, an immoral degenerate, and a worthless charlatan. According to Assistant Director Sullivan, who had direct access to the surveillance files on King, which are denied the American people, King had embezzled or misapplied substantial amounts of money contributed to the civil rights movement. King used SCLC funds to pay for liquor and numerous prostitutes, both black and white, who were brought to his hotel rooms, often 2 at a time, for drunken sex parties, which sometimes lasted for several days. These types of activities were the norm for King's speaking and organizing tours. In fact, an outfit called the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, Tennessee, which is putting on display the 2 bedrooms from the Lorraine Motel where King stayed the night before he was shot, has declined to depict in any way the occupants of those rooms. That, according to exhibit designer Gerard Eisterhold, would be, quote, close to blasphemy. The reason? Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spent his last night on Earth having sexual intercourse with 2 women at the motel and physically beating and abusing a 3rd. Sullivan also stated that King had alienated the affections of numerous married women. According to Sullivan, who in 30 years with the Bureau had seen everything there was to be seen of the seamy side of life, King was one of only 7 people he had ever encountered who was such a total degenerate. Noting the violence that almost invariably attended King's supposedly non-violent marches, Sullivan's probe revealed a very different King from the carefully crafted public image. King welcomed members of many different black groups as members of his SCLC, many of them advocates and practitioners of violence. King's only admonition on the subject was that they should embrace, quote, tactical nonviolence, close quote. Sullivan also relates an incident in which King met in a financial conference with Communist Party representatives, not knowing that one of the participants was an infiltrator actually working for the FBI. J. Edgar Hoover personally saw to it that documented information on King's communist connections was provided to the President and to Congress, and conclusive information from FBI files was also provided to major newspapers and newswire services. But were the American people informed of King's real nature? No, for even in the 1960s, the fix was in. The controlled media and the bought politicians were bound and determined to push their racial mixing program on America. King was their man, and nothing was going to get in their way. With a few minor exceptions, these facts have been kept from the American people. The pro-King propaganda machine grinds on, and it is even reported that a serious proposal has been made to add some of King's writings as a new book in the Bible. Ladies and gentlemen, the purpose of this radio program is far greater than to prove to you the immorality and subversion of this man called King. I want you to start to think for yourselves. I want you to consider this. What are the forces and motivation behind the controlled media's active promotion of King? What does it tell you about our politicians when you see them almost without exception falling all over themselves to honor King as a national hero? What does it tell you about our society when any public criticism of this moral leper and communist functionary is considered grounds for dismissal? What does it tell you about the controlled media when you see how they have successfully suppressed the truth and held out a picture of King that can only be described as a colossal lie? You need to think, my fellow Americans. You desperately need to wake up.
So beginning here, Michael King Jr. is his real name. Okay, he's more commonly known as Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. is a total fraud. And it's a whole lot more rare to see people quote what Martin Luther King Jr. actually believed. And I pulled this quotation straight out of what's called the Papers of Martin Luther King Jr., Volume 1, which he wrote November 23rd, 1949. He said, quote, "This doctrine, upon which the Easter faith rests." Now let me stop right there before I continue the quote and explain that Easter, if in case those of you who didn't understand, is a total abomination before God because it's a pagan tradition of witches. Okay? It has nothing to do with the resurrection of Christ whatsoever. And if you want to learn more about that, you can go to creationliberty.com, go to the search bar, type in the word Easter, E-A-S-T-E-R, and that'll give you an article called Easter, Christian Celebrating Abomination. Read through that, and that'll show you the truth behind Easter, where it came from, because the only place Easter is ever mentioned in the Bible is one time, and it is a pagan celebration. It has nothing to do with God. Anyway, so let's continue with this quote. It says, "This doctrine, upon which the Easter faith rests," so what he's referring to is the resurrection of Christ in that, okay? So he says, "This doctrine upon which the Easter faith rests symbolizes the ultimate Christian conviction that Christ conquered death. From a literary, historical, and philosophical point of view, this doctrine raises many questions." End quote. Wait, it raises many questions? I thought he was supposed to be a Christian. I know. You think that, but you see, really he questioned it. He flat out did not believe in the resurrection of the Lord Jesus Christ. He posed questions to cast doubt. He continues in this same writing from November 23rd, 1949, same place. He continues to say, quote, "In fact, the external evidence for the authenticity of this doctrine," and the doctrine he's talking about, the resurrection of Christ, "is found wanting." The word wanting means lacking. He's saying the external evidence for the authenticity of the resurrection of Christ is found lacking. But here again, the external evidence is not the most important thing, for it in itself fails to tell us precisely the thing we most want to know. What experiences of early Christians led to the formulation of the doctrine? End quote. Okay, this one I've got to explain. In case you didn't catch what he just said, what he just questioned, he's saying, first of all, that he doesn't believe. He claims the external evidence is lacking, so he doesn't believe in the resurrection at all. And I want to point out that there is no external evidence that would be found from Christ rising from the dead. You're not going to get external evidence other than the testimony of hundreds of eyewitnesses that saw him alive afterwards. Then he continues to say that external evidence is not even that important to him, which means even if he had some sort of direct external evidence, like, okay, let's say he had a video of the event for some reason, he still wouldn't believe it. So why do I say that he still wouldn't believe in the resurrection of Christ even if he had direct evidence? Well, just look at that last question he posed. The question has a built-in assumption that the doctrines of Scripture did not come from God, but rather they came from what he called, quote, the experiences of the early Christians, end quote. He said, what experiences of early Christians led to the formulation of the doctrine? That means He believes that the doctrines of Scripture were written down by Christ's disciples based on their experiences, not directly from the mouth of God. He does not believe in the inspiration and inerrancy of the Word of God. So do you still believe that Martin Luther King Jr. was a Christian now? Let's continue reading from the papers of Martin Luther King Jr., Volume 1. Quote, "The root of our inquiry is found in the fact that the early Christians had lived with Jesus. They had been captivated by the magnetic power of his personality. This basic experience led to the faith that he could never die." End quote. So according to Martin Luther King Jr., it wasn't that the disciples heard Christ's doctrine and believed, nor was it that they saw the prophecies of the Old Testament fulfilled with their own eyes. Nor was it the miracles that he performed and later gave them the power to perform, but rather, King believed that they simply had personal inner feelings that led them to make up the doctrines that we see in the New Testament. And Martin Luther King Jr., also rejected the doctrine of the virgin birth of Christ. Again, from the same document, same section, November 23rd, 1949, from the papers of Martin Luther King Jr., it says, quote, "This doctrine gives the modern scientific mind much more trouble than the first, for it seems downright improbable and even impossible for anyone to be born without a human father. First, we must admit that the evidence for the tenability of this doctrine is too shallow to convince any objective thinker." End quote. And so by objective thinker, he's talking about himself. The point being is that he is looking at this from, I want physical evidence of these things. Physical evidence tells us that someone has to have a human father in order for someone to be birthed. He doesn't believe in the miracles of God. He doesn't believe in the power and the authority of God. He doesn't believe in the Christian God of the Bible. You see what I'm saying? King, he goes on to claim that the virgin birth, if you'll continue to, because you can go look this up. I've got all the references on the website. Okay, go look these up and read it for yourself. He goes on to claim that the virgin birth was never talked about by Isaiah. Now, we're talking about Isaiah chapter 7, and starting in verse 14. It says, "Therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel." He claims that that a virgin birth was never talked about by Isaiah, even though I just showed you how it was clear as day it did. And what he says is that the word virgin was a mistranslation. He says, quote, "mistranslation of the original Hebrew," end quote. That's not true at all. But King's intentions were not to serve the Christian God of the Bible. Again, I emphasize that King had absolutely no intention of serving the Christian God of the Bible by going to a seminary college. This is from the autobiography of Martin Luther King Jr., Chapter 2, talking about Morehouse College. So from the autobiography of Martin Luther King Jr., it says, quote, "My call to the ministry was not a miraculous or supernatural something. On the contrary, it was an inner urge calling me to serve humanity." I'm sorry, did he say that it was an inner calling to serve the Lord Jesus Christ? No. An inner urge calling me to serve humanity. I was at the point where I was deeply interested in political matters and social ills. Was he deeply interested in seeking truth or leading people to Christ so they can be born again? Was he interested in teaching the truth and preaching the gospel? No. Martin Luther King Jr.'s foundation was actually built on Hinduism. I have here a picture of Martin Luther King Jr. in his office, and on the wall, right above his desk, he has a photo of Gandhi. It was Hindu philosophy which he was studying. In this book called Humanity and the Nature of Man, which is also republished in the Black Church Review, Volume 2, it says, quote, "When he was studying at Crozer Theological Seminary in Pennsylvania, King heard a lecture on the legendary Indian Mahatma Gandhi and the nonviolent civil disobedience campaign that was used effectively against British rule in India. Besides Gandhi, King was also influenced by the 19th century American writer Henry David Thoreau's theories on how to use nonviolence and achieve social change. Gandhi also acknowledged being influenced by Thoreau, especially his essay Civil Disobedience. In 1957, King visited India and returned determined to use the nonviolent methods of Gandhi. End quote. And then King adopted those pagan philosophies. They also taught King the philosophies of Henry David Thoreau, and Thoreau was a pantheist, and he is commonly praised by atheists. Atheists love Henry David Thoreau because he took a sharply skeptical stance against the Christian God of the Bible. But as we can clearly see, King's true way of thinking followed Hindus and pantheists, and he put a great distance between himself and Christ's doctrine. Martin Luther King Jr. plagiarized much of his work. Now, some of you who are kind of sharp on these issues, pretty smart on this stuff, will say, well, why hasn't anybody gone back to his works, reviewed them, and revoked his degree for all this plagiarism? Well, King's works have been reviewed. Let's see what the Boston University panel concluded after their investigation of King's writings and the accusations of plagiarism. This is from the New York Times in an article they have entitled Boston University Panel Finds Plagiarism by Dr. King. Back in 1991, they said, quote, a committee of scholars appointed by Boston University concluded today that the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. plagiarized passages in his dissertation for a doctoral degree at the university 36 years ago. There is no question, the committee said in a report to the university's provost. Provost is the senior administrative panel. There is no question but that Dr. King plagiarized in the dissertation by appropriating material from sources not explicitly credited in notes, or mistakenly credited, or credited generally and at some distance in the text from a close paraphrase or verbatim quotation. Despite its findings, the committee said that no thought should be given to the revocation of Dr. King's doctoral degree, an action that the panel said would serve no purpose. End quote.
Before we go any further into the segment, I just wanted to say a few quick words on my opinions concerning Sister Rosa Parks. My opinion is that Rosa Parks was most certainly very deceptive and a communist. But a long time ago, we always have to give an individual room for change. A long time ago, I used to visit what's known as a mother of the church. She was in her 80s. We called her Mother Woods. And I used to go visit Mother Woods' house many times for years after Friday night service at church. And we would sit there a lot of times and we would watch Christian TV, or she would change through the channels and we would watch segments of different programs and we would discuss those programs. Well, Mother Woods had these old picture books from something known as the ABSA Council. This is a very old Pentecostal organization. And I used to peruse those books. They look like sort of like high school yearbooks. And in one of those publications, I saw Mother Woods standing there next to Miss Rosa Parks. And I remember I said, well, Mother Woods, that's Rosa Parks. And she said, oh, yeah. And she was telling me how nice she was. According to Mother Woods, this woman had gotten saved. I believe that Rosa Parks did get baptized in Jesus' name. I'm almost positive she received the supernatural infilling of the Holy Ghost. Up until her death, I do believe she was listed as a Baptist, but yet, if I remember right, her funeral was held at a very large Pentecostal church in Michigan. If I remember correctly, the pastor's name, I think his last name was Ellis. So I just wanted to throw that out there that yes, this woman may have started off as a deceptive communist, but that's the whole idea behind salvation, the whole idea behind evil. This started in the Garden of Eden, and the world moves on a foundation of deception, the same deception that started way back when in the Garden of Eden. And the whole idea behind salvation is that one can be delivered, which is what I believe happened to Sister Rosa Parks.
It's crazy that Rosa Parks was idolized for not getting up, but Jesus is hated for being hung. What kind of logic is that? Everyone wants something they can see to believe in. But what if everything you've been seeing has been staged, magnified, distorted, and designed for your destruction? Most who know won't tell, and those who don't know hate when they're being told. There are billions in the world, but only a few hundred shown on TV at a time for you. So why can't it be controlled? Now I need you all to really follow me on this. Television aired its first show in the 1940s, right? We talking about the beginning of television, 1940s. I've been telling you all that these televisions are molding you, grooming you, and lying to you all at the same time. What taught you your so-called black history that you cling to today? I'll tell you. The teachers in school and the television.
And the early English settlers who were called, class? Pilgrims! That's right, the Pilgrims, very good. The Penguins.
Most of us have never experienced the opposite race being racist toward us, but still we cling to this garbage they fed us. And I know I will get tons of comments under the video of people explaining how others have been so racist towards them, and I understand, but they too have been groomed by exactly what I'm about to break down in this video.
Left side! Strong side! Left side! Strong side! Left side! Strong side! Left side! Left side! Strong side!
The public schools are nothing but Masonic organizations to weed through the young bottom feeders, to pick the ones they deem best for this satanic society they are creating. That's why you have valedictorians and salutatorians and such that shine above the rest, showing you that it's all a game to get to the top of the pyramid. And this Rosa Parks story is deadly too, because Rosa Parks was a high-ranked Eastern Star linked to Freemasonry. Whenever they place these Eastern Stars in your face, it always has an agenda behind it. And before they get in front of you, in your face or in front of a single mic, they are well taught and are obedient to the task at hand. She helped shape the mindsets that most still walk around with today. And in order to control billions, they have always done it by separation, division, and or segregation. Now, how ironic is it that one of the first things they bring to you on the television, once it was created, is division and splitting the people up. Truthfully speaking, every civil rights leader they have ever shown you on a television is a sellout. You don't get on TV unless you've sold out. Rosa was on TV so much around the 1950s, her middle name should have been Broadcast. Not only did Rosa Parks get on the TV, she received plaques, Golden Plate Awards, and has a transit city named after her. She was on a TV show entitled Touched by an Angel. They did like 7 exclusive shows on networks in her honor. She had 17 books out in circulation. They named streets after her, boulevards, avenues, and even the Rosa Parks Way. To some, she was a civil rights legend. But to me, she was simply a hired hand in a racial discombobulator under the Eastern Star movement. Rosa Parks' movement went hand in hand with Malcolm Luther, who was another Mason sellout.
Tell Rosa Parks down. Man, ain't nobody exempt in the barbershop. You know that. Ain't nobody exempt. You can talk about whoever and whatever, whenever you want to in the barbershop.
Why you gotta tear Rosa down like this, Eddie? You know you're wrong. Keep on walking. You wrong. You walking by yourself this time, pal. I ain't with you. I'll tell you one thing. You better never let Jesse Jackson hear you talking about that.
See, if it wasn't for them, the slave movies that Hollywood keeps shoving down your throat, they would have no effect. Rosa Parks and Martin's story also helps you to accept that only blacks were on plantation in the days of old, when really blacks and whites were on the plantations in the days of old. Man, we done got played. And even though I'm woke to this, by the grace of God and the wisdom of God, I say we still, because for the longest I thought these people actually held value in our lives. And now that I am older and wiser, I see that they are nothing. but actors. Did you all ever stop to ask yourself who took the pictures of Rosa Parks sitting at the front of that bus? As if she had paparazzi following her around or something? If it was a so-called color guy snapping the photos left and right, why aren't the white people in the picture looking angry towards the colored man having their photo? And if it was a white man, so-called white man with the camera, why wouldn't Rosa address the random so-called white man snapping her pictures everywhere? That's kind of creepy if you ask me. Isn't it ironic that there is always a cameraman on standby to catch these moments? Just like there happened to be a cameraman to catch the people pointing their finger after Malcolm was so-called shot. These cameramen always catch the moments, the right moments, right?
Oh, maybe somebody can! Is that our cameraman? He's matching him stride for stride! He's run the whole race with that camera on his shoulder! Just incredible!
I'm telling you all, life is all what you believe, man. And for most people, sad to say, it may be too late before they finally get it. This Rosa Parks story has become so successful in destroying our true history that is biblical that they won't even let the bus die, man. They claim they found the bus that Rosa sat in. It was rotting away in somebody's property being used as a tool shed. They claim they refurbished it so that the future generations can see it. You know, man, I mean, over and over and over. Y'all listen. When I tell you, you must question this. If they won't even let the bus die, man, they won't even let the bus die, y'all. And all this Rosa Parks stuff came exactly 100 days after Emmett Till story, which we gonna slice that up later. But don't y'all see the hook, line, and sinker effect? Now, I am by no way saying that there wasn't racial tension in the land, or aka the world at the time, but these acts were only placed before you to ignite a fire instead of diffusing a situation. As long as people are on the earth, there will be differences. But all I'm saying is these puppets were put in front of you to program. The whites you saw in the picture with Rose on the bus, they were either high-ranked Freemasons themselves or either sons or daughters of Freemasons who would later rise up the ranks. At age 11, Rosa enrolled in a so-called industrial school for girls, which basically means Masonic school. The school was funded and started by women from England named Alice White and Margaret Beard. They groomed these women in Eastern Starship as well as educated them to the point that they could easily come out and deceive you. Rosa Parks stated that when she was sitting on the bus, she didn't move because she thought of Emmett Till.
When I was on the bus the time I was arrested, the only thing that was on my mind was that I did not want to be treated in that way.
You see how every act they come out with directly links to the next, and they all run concurrent and they coincide? Now there was no social media around the time for people to even express to the world how fake it was or how overly stretched the whole thing was being portrayed. And most people around that time are dying off now due to old age, so there aren't many to confirm how the state of the world was when this propaganda was being forced on the masses. For instance, I showed videos where the caravan of so-called immigrants forcing their way into America was fake. Now, I know this, and those who follow the channel know this, but a 5-year-old right now doesn't know it. Now, when we who know are dead and gone, they can just go in the system, erase all of my videos about it and everybody else, you know, and rewrite history for the next few generations all over again. So where the caravan news was fake to us, it then becomes a reality to all those who follow after us and who believe it. You can rewrite history into whatever you want if there's no truth floating around to put up against it. Why do you think Obama was so quick to take a picture on the so-called Rosa Parks bus, y'all? Because he is mocking you, mocking those who are asleep. He knows in order for the pyramid to maintain, stories like this must go on. You know you aren't a regular person when Bill Clinton speaks at your funeral, man. And it was held in the same church where Ariana Grande was up there with that short dress on, putting on the show for all them weird, horny puppets. That entire church is filled with lost souls, man, who do not respect the true and living God at all. Let's face it, Rosa Parks lived like a rock star, an idol, a celebrity, and has been made a mental martyr for the so-called African Americans. And the day you realize that African American only means dark Englishman, you will finally wake up. Listen, y'all, Black Lives Matter, all that garbage was created to continue the racial division amongst the people. The same people who gave you Black Lives Matter made the black and white chess pieces. The same people who gave you the KKK gave you the modern day racist Hebrew Israelite bullhorners on the corner. The same people who gave you the Emmett Till story also gave you the fake Rodney King beating, and it goes on and on. As I said in the previous video, if you going around still identifying yourself as black or white, then you are still in a deep sleep and have a chain around your mind mentally enslaving you, so that you will then teach it to your kids to enslave them. I am here to tell you all, the history of this world is not how they have painted it for us. They have fabricated the hate, positioned the fake, and the history they recreate. If it wasn't for the television, think about it, you would probably love your neighbor more. If it wasn't for the television and the teachers in the school drilling this black history in you, you would have never known what it was like to feel hatred in your heart towards another race. As soon as the television came out, division was one of the first things that they promoted, y'all. Why is that? Because without division, the so-called elites have no control. And as far as me and my house, Rosa Parks will never be idolized.
So you guys remember me breaking down the MLK shooting, right? The fake hoax assassination of Martin Luther King. Yeah, Martin Luther King, man. 100% stage, right? I'm going to go ahead and go through these pictures with you guys really quick. And, yeah. I don't know how many times we break down hoaxes and false flags and, stage events, but they always get the pool of blood area poured in exactly where they need it. Not really anything in realistic or real life where blood splatter and things like that. Another Boston bombing, Sandy Crooks, or even Saugus or Parkland high school shooting. They're all the same. You know what I mean? They stage it. Even the Columbine shooting was 100% stage, and I did a breakdown on that video too, and they also took that down on YouTube. I'll probably upload it to BitChute. And 100% stage. MLK was shot in the face by a rifle, a sniper rifle, and I've shot this weapon many times, right? I'm gonna take. You guys got to take note, right? Martin Luther King was shot on the right side of his face, right? Through and through. They said the bullet went in and through his face, right? So there has to be an entrance wound and an exit wound that we need to look for. Remember that. Remember that one video I just showed you guys just recently where that man shot through a piece of meat, and one side it's a clear hole, and the other side, the exit wound was really bad. You know what I mean? That it's gonna be ripping through all kinds of things on the exit wound. You guys remember that, right? And and I'm gonna show you Martin Luther King's face in a little bit, right? So there's no blood splatter, no nothing, right? Nothing at all. Not on this little cart thingy, not on the white walls, none of this stuff, not on the windows, not on the little fire extinguisher here, not on the wall where these people are standing, right? He was shot with a 30-06, right? So let's go ahead and go over to here. Everything is staged, the whole scene is staged. The cameraman stays right there, gets perfect pictures of Mr. MLK, right? You see that? The blood never soaks into his jacket underneath him. I'm going to show you right now where the cleanup crew was just a janitor, picking it up, you know what I mean? The apartment manager, janitor guy came and just scraped it all up, right? Look at that. No way. He puts it in a can. Look at a little plastic jar or a can. I'm just going to scrape this up. You know what I mean? So let's go ahead and go back. And that's the blood there. See, that's why I told you guys. It never soaked into his jacket the other way. blood should have soaked into his garment. You know what I mean? But that never happens with fake blood. You know what I mean? Like Boston bombing blood. You know what I mean? Like it never drips anywhere. You know what I mean? Like David Bunham, right? Or Jeff Bunham. And you're gonna go here. They're gonna just cover up the scene. Cover up Mr. MLK, but this is the weapon right here, a 30-06, folks. This is a really powerful weapon, right? Real powerful, right? So that's what they said that killed MLK, right? And this is Mr. MLK in the casket, right? You tell me, where is the entrance and the exit wound on this man's face, right? Where is it? I definitely don't see one. And if this is the makeup artist or the surgeon that did this back in the days, amazing. You know what I'm saying? And you know me, man, I lived in the hood. My friends been shot. I mean, they've been stabbed with knives, screwdrivers, and this and that. You should see the wounds that are on these people. It doesn't heal up like Mr. MLK's face. You know what I mean? Being shot with the 30-06, right? Okay, where's Mr. MLK's face? I know it's down here a little bit. So this is here. Another shot of his face, right? Another shot, and then there's a good picture of him down here somewhere. Let me see here. Here, Mr. MLK. Look at this, folks. Where was he shot at? You know what I'm saying? Nowhere to be found at all. There's another one too, I think. Or is that it? I think that was it. Yeah, I think that was it. But MLK, man. So here, I'm going to show you guys a 30-06 now. This is a 30-06 comparison chart. You guys see this next to the shotgun 12 gauge shotgun shell? This is a 30-06 right here, folks. This one all the way to the second second in the line right here. You guys see that? All the way to the 22s right here, right? 40 cal, 45 caliber, 38 special, 357. You all the way up into a 30-06. You know what that bullet would have done to this man's face? You know what I mean? No way. But yeah, they use MLK. I really don't know. You know what I mean? I don't know if MLK was an agent himself or Jesse Jackson, used them. You know what I mean? They used and abused Mr. MLK to divide and conquer. You know what I mean? They wanted to see what blacks were going to rise up against the beast system. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Or just to create the divide and conquer. That's what they wanted to do. Right? Because we know that these men here are 100% sellout agents right here. The Boule Freemasons right here. Yeah, Boule Freemasonry. Black Freemasonry, folks. These men are 100% CIA agents, folks. Yeah. On record. Yeah. So, I don't know if they killed off MLK from the movie, but his death was not 100% legit. Mr. MLK, I don't know, divide and conquer was the key, was the motive or what, but that's what happened, folks. All right, guys, I'll talk to you later. God bless you. If I can find the original one, I'll upload it. I'll talk to you guys later. God bless you. Peace out.